Here's a quick overview of the Umajin platform. This shows how we really support this concept of designing, developing, and then deploying solutions. We start with this design-led agile virtual cycle. So your work goes around in loops that can take one day, maybe even an hour. And then you're naturally going to come up with requests because there's no magic. So you may need connectors to some proprietary systems, which may need some code. So the neat thing about this is you can start your engineering loop, and that might follow a normal 1 week sprint. And they just meet in the middle here. So you've got a really good way of creating a lot of content, creating a lot of goal-directed development, which we'll go into in a moment, and then requesting the code samples where you need them. Umajin locus of control is all about the psychological concept that people like to control their work. So whether you're a business user trying to create essentially your project brief directly in the tool, if you're a designer trying to create the branding and the user experience, you do that directly in the tool, and then you work with the developer to create the extensions that you require. So it's sort of all in one place. The goal-directed development is an important concept because it allows the business user and the designer to get more done, and then to work with the developer when a new module needs to be created. So your goals, let's imagine you've got 3 goals here, 1, 2, 3. Then essentially those go through this Umajin engine. If you can specify what you want to do as a list, it will be able to generate the correct output to achieve those outcomes. And the great thing is a lot of the complexity is hidden in that space. So that imposes and implies all of the security rules, takes advantage of all the caching and performance management and real-time rendering. All of that happens under the hood. So really you can think of these goals as being a contract where it tries to achieve the contract that you've requested of it. And then importantly, we have this concept of a virtualization layer on top of these operating systems. And in fact, it could be on top of other systems like a web browser or Java. But essentially, it unifies and treats image resources, audio resources, network resources. It puts them all through the same pipeline. So this is a very important concept, the idea that the application system is part of what Umajin provides, so that business users, designers, and developers don't have to kind of deal with all the plumbing under the hood. And then from the perspective of the technology, really Umajin can be considered to be made up of 3 core hybrid technologies. You've got this concept of your development frameworks, which is your enterprise software sort of that you're used to using, so normal languages, powerful tools, connectors, all that kind of stuff. You've got these kind of game engine technologies, sort of what you'd see in Unity and Unreal. So this idea of real-time, high performance, this idea of artist-driven tools or designer-driven tools in our case. And then this low-code space, and particularly with our goal-directed development, it's simple lists of actions that can then be extended by real programmers who might want to write JavaScript or may even want to go crazy and literally write C++ or low-level native code. So we don't sort of hit the blocks that a lot of these tools do. We're not also limited by HTML because this is a fully natively rendered runtime by default. And then really the concept of this runtime or the Umajin sort of environment is that it acts as an analogy to a web browser. It's not a web browser, but we can essentially extend it with lots and lots of building blocks. And those are essentially high performance native sort of chunks of technology. So it might be video, it might be 3D, it might be IoT data sources, it might be AI layers, you might have VR and AR, a very deep database layer. Basically, we can just keep on adding modules onto the system. So it's sort of designed around this modular extensible architecture. And then importantly, your developers over here and your low-code tools team can be creating kind of new components, new actions that kind of feed right into this. And then we have a whole bunch of systems for basically grabbing assets, particularly useful for digital twins, but for basically grabbing kind of 3D models, animation, and a lot of geospatial data. And then from there, I'm just going to briefly mention user experience. So I think it's something hopefully that people are pretty comfortable with. So it's this this idea of there's a tree of components. So over here we've placed our image perhaps on screen. So it appears in this is our app here that we're kind of previewing. And this is our first page, which has our image on it. It's page 1. And then we can go in and create additional pages as we need to. So this kind of defines our project. And then I'm going to make another object here. And this one's going to be selected. And then you're going to be able to see this button is highlighted. That's the selected object right now. And then the great thing about that is over here, we're going to see a bunch of properties. So for example, it might be the text property, which is currently set to press. But I can go through and just change any of these properties as I need to. There's also a tab here, so I could change to the actions and set up a list of actions against say this button. So it might change page or send an email or call some of the workflow. So this is a really simple metaphor. This extends for the native apps as we've been describing, but it also extends to controlling things like maybe a responsive web interface or a workflow builder or VR training. So this idea of I've got building blocks, properties and actions associated with them. I'm laying them out in some kind of 2D or 3D control space, and there's a bunch of different pages that make up my overall project. And then within the architecture, I think what's really interesting is that we have 3 large elements that make up the kind of the structure, and then it's manifest in a few different ways. But essentially, you can think of the Umajin cloud, which is the content management, as being a cache system, and it's really sort of in charge of communicating with the editor and allowing the business users, the developers, the designers to create content and to get it into the cloud in real time. So it allows this all to be updated. And then the cool thing is this cache also supports the distribution to the users. So all of the users get that content and it's available to them. And then I guess from the perspective of your actual apps, it's a little different because now instead of being multi-user and assets or content, we're talking about having live data. So this is usually enterprise systems of one type or another. There might be databases, there might be REST calls used by your DBA, your developer. But essentially, this is a mechanism to expose your ecosystem through a sort of secure pipeline and a secure line directly to your end users. Now, the editor knows about these because you need to build them into your app. But in the end, it's the end user who has a direct communication through this, monitored, secure gateway to all of your data and enterprise systems. And it's really important that while this is a client tool for making the experience, that getting the experience and the assets to your users and managing your enterprise data safely and securely are critical factors that normally take a lot of different tools. They're all here in the same environment, so that really makes a big difference. And to speak to that a bit further, so this is cloud, this is the sort of the network stack for the client, and this is your server and your APIs. You really do have the content syncing, authoring, and publishing, so there's a pipeline to make sure stuff gets through to your users. On your network layer, you've really got this sort of robust real-time communications. You support, abstractions across different protocols. There's even offline, online modes. And we support a whole range of devices all together in real time. And you might have a very different experience for VR versus AR on your smartphone versus desktop. And, that's really important that it's all the same data, it's all the same experience, it's all the same content, but presented in a way that makes sense for you. Then from the server perspective, you've got your database and your REST gateway. So this is getting through to your local database, your external databases, and your external APIs that for your enterprise SaaS software or your on-prem software. It enforces security and it manages monitoring and revoking access to systems as well. So I think that within this, the fact that the system knows about users, it knows about their rights, their roles, single sign-on, and it has a workflow element is really important. So within the server, you can trigger workflows which can be part of applications, they can be part of external processes. They can hook into internal tools like Teams or Slack. They can really be part of tying together the digital transformation process for users. So yeah, that's a little bit of the philosophy of Umajin.